Holy art thou, O God, the universal's Father. Holy art thou, O God, whose will perfects itself by means of its own powers. Holy art thou, O God, who willest to be known and art known by thine own. Holy art thou, who didst by word make to consist the things that are. Holy art thou, of whom all nature hath been made an image. Holy art thou, whose from nature hath never made. Holy art thou, more powerful than all power. Holy art thou, transcending all preeminence. Holy art thou, thou better than all praise. Accept my reasons for offerings pure, from soul and heart, for aye stretched up to thee. O thou unutterable, unspeakable, whose name naught but the silence can express. Give ear to me, who pray that I may ne'er of gnosis fail, gnosis which is our common being's nature. And fill me with thy power, and with this grace of thine, that I may give the light to those in ignorance of the race, my brethren and thy sons. For this cause I believe, and I bear witness. I go to life and light. Blessed art thou, O Father, Mother, thy man would wholly be as thou art holy, e'en as thou gavest him thy full authority to be. He is himself both things that are and things that are not. The things that are he hath made manifest. He keepeth things that are not in himself. She is the God beyond all name. He the unmanifest. He the most manifest. He whom the mind alone can contemplate. He visible unto the eyes as well. He is the one of no body. The one of many bodies, nay, rather, he of every body. Naught is there which he is not, for all are he, and he is all. Let every nature of the world receive the utterance of my hymn. Open thou earth, let every bolt of the abyss be drawn for me. Stir not, ye trees. I am about to hymn creation's Lord, both all and one. Ye heavens, open, and ye winds, stay still, and let God's deathless sphere receive my word. For I will sing the praise of him who founded all, who fixed the earth and hung up heaven, and gave command that ocean should afford sweet water to the earth. To both those parts that are inhabited and those that are not, for the support and the use of every man, who made the fire to shine for gods, and men for every act. Let us together all give praise to him, her, Alpha, Omega, Isis, Osiris, Yin and Yang, Sophia, Hermes, the indescribable, formless, sublime above the heavens of every nature, Lord. 'Tis he who is the eye of mind. May he accept the praise of these my powers. Ye powers that are within me, hymn the one and all. Sing with my will, powers all that are within me. O blessed Gnosis, by thee illumined, hymning through thee the life that mind alone can see, I joy in joy of mind. Sing with me praises, all ye powers. Sing praise, my self-control. Sing thou through me, my righteousness, the praises of the righteous. Sing thou, my sharing all, the praises of the all. Through me sing truths, praises. Sing thou, O good, the good, O life and light. From us to you our praises flow. Father, Mother, I give thee thanks. To thee, thou energy of all my powers. I give thee thanks, O God, thou power of all my energies. Thy reason sings through me thy praises. Take back through me the all into thy reason, my reasonable oblation. Thus cry the powers in me, they sing thy praise. Thou all, they do thy will, from thee, thy will to thee, the all. Receive from all the reasonable oblation. The all that is in us, O life, preserve, O light, illumine it, O God, inspirit it. Is it thy mind that plays the shepherd to thy word, O thou Creator? Bestower of the Spirit upon all? For thou art God, thy man thus cries to thee, through fire, through air, through earth, through water, and through spirit, through thy creatures. 'Tis from thy aeon I have found praise-giving, and in thy will, the object of my search, have I found rest. As it is claimed to be unphilosophical to inquire into first causes, scientists now occupy themselves with considering their physical effects. The field of scientific investigation is therefore bounded by physical nature. When once its limits are reached, inquiry must stop, and their work be recommenced. With all due to our learned men, they are like the squirrel upon its revolving wheel, for they are doomed to turn their matter over and over again. Science is a mighty potency, and it is not for us pygmies to question her, but the scientists are not themselves science embodied any more than the men our planet, or the planet itself. We have neither the right to demand nor power to compel our modern-day philosopher to accept without challenge a geographical description of the dark side of the moon. But if in some lunar cataclysm one of her inhabitants should be hurled thence into the attraction of our atmosphere and land safe and sound at Dr. Carpenter's door, he would be indicatable as recrant to professional duty if he should fail to set the physical problem at rest. Recreant. For a man of science to refuse an opportunity to investigate any new phenomenon, whether it comes to him in the shape of a man from the moon or a ghost from the Eddy homestead, is alike reprehensible. Whether arrived at by the method of Aristotle or that of Plato, we need not stop to inquire. But is it a fact that both the inner and outer natures of man are claimed to have been thoroughly understood by the ancient andrologists? Notwithstanding these superficial hypotheses of geologists, we are beginning to have almost daily proofs in corroboration of the assertions of those philosophers. They divided the interminable periods of human existence on this planet into cycles, during each of which mankind gradually reached the culminating point of highest civilization, and gradually relapsed into abject barbarism. To what eminence the race in its progress had several times arrived may be feebly surmised by the wonderful monuments of old, still visible, and the descriptions given by Herodotus of other marvels of which no traces now remain. Even in his days, the gigantic structures of many pyramids and world-famous temples were but masses of ruins. Scattered by the unrelenting hand of time, they are described by the father of history as these venerable witnesses of the long bygone glory of departed ancestors. He shrinks from speaking of divine things and gives to posterity but an imperfect description from hearsay of some marvelous subterranean chambers of the labyrinth, where lay and now lie concealed the sacred remains of the king initiates. We can judge, moreover, of the lofty civilization reached in some periods of antiquity by the historical descriptions of the ages of the Ptolemies. Yet in that epoch the arts and sciences were considered to be degenerating, and the secret of a number of the former had been already lost. In the recent excavations of Mariat Bay, at the foot of the pyramids, statues of wood and other relics have been exhumed, which show that long before the period of the first dynasties, the Egyptians had attained to a refinement and perfection which is calculated to excite the wonder of even the most ardent admirers of Grecian art. Bayard Taylor describes these statues in one of his lectures and tells us that the beauty of the heads, ornamented with eyes of precious stones and copper eyelids, is unsurpassed, far below the stratum of sand in which lay the remains gathered into the collections of Lepsius Abbott and the British Museum, where found buried the tangible proofs of the Hermetic doctrine of cycles, which has been already explained. Dr. Schliemann, the enthusiastic Hellenist, has recently found in his excavations in the Troad, abundant evidences of the same gradual change from barbarism to civilization, and from civilization to barbarism again. Why then should we feel so reluctant to admit the possibility that if the antediluvians were so much better versed than ourselves in certain sciences as to have been perfectly acquainted with important arts, which we now term lost, they might have equally excelled in psychological knowledge? Such a hypothesis must be considered as reasonable as any other until some countervailing evidence shall be discovered to destroy it. Every true savant admits that in many respects human knowledge is yet in its infancy. Can it be that our cycle began in ages comparatively recent? These cycles, according to the Chaldean philosophy, do not embrace all mankind at once, at one and the same time. Professor Draper partially corroborates this view by saying that the periods into which geology has found it convenient to divide the progress of man and civilization are not abrupt epochs which hold good simultaneously for the whole human race. Giving as an instance the wandering Indians of America, who are only at the present moment emerging from the Stone Age, thus more than once scientific men have unwittingly confirmed the testimony of the ancients. Any Kabbalist well acquainted with the Pythagorean system of numerals and geometry can demonstrate that the metaphysical views of Plato were based upon the strictest mathematical principles. True mathematics, says the Magicon, is something with which all higher sciences are connected. Common mathematics is but a deceitful phantasmagoria, which much praised infallibility only arises from this, that materials, conditions, and references are made its foundation. Scientists who believe they have adopted the Aristotelian method only because they creep when they do not run from demonstrated particulars to universals, glorify this method of inductive philosophy and reject that of Plato, which they treat as unsubstantial. Professor Draper laments that such speculative mystics as Ammonius Saccas and Plotinus should have taken the place of the severe geometers of the old museum. He forgets that geometry, of all sciences, the only one which proceeds from universals to particulars, was precisely the method employed by Plato in his philosophy. As long as exact science confines its observations to physical conditions and proceeds Aristotle-like, it certainly cannot fail. But notwithstanding that the world of matter is boundless for us, it still is finite. And thus materialism will turn forever in this vitiated circle, unable to soar higher than the circumference will permit. The cosmological theory of numerals, which Pythagoras learned from the Egyptian hierophants, is alone able to reconcile the two units, matter and spirit, and cause each to demonstrate the other mathematically. The sacred numbers of the universe in their esoteric combination solve the great problem and explain the theory of radiation and the cycle of the emanations. The lower orders, before they develop into higher ones, must emanate from the higher spiritual ones, and when arrived at the turning point, reabsorbed again into the infinite. Physiology, like everything else in this world of constant evolution, is subject to this cyclic revolution, as it now seems to be hardly emerging from the shadows of the lower arc. So it may be one day proved to have been at the highest point of the circumference of the circle far earlier than the days of Pythagoras. Moccus and Sidonian, the physiologist and teacher of the science of anatomy, flourished long before the sage of Samos, and the latter received the sacred instructions from his disciples and descendants. Pythagoras, the pure philosopher, the deeply versed in the profounder phenomena of nature, the noble inheritor of the ancient lore, whose great aim was to free the soul from the fetters of sense and force it to realize its powers, must live eternally in human memory. was to free the soul from the fetters. This impenetrable veil of arcane secrecy was thrown over the sciences taught in the sanctuary. This is the cause of the modern depreciating of the ancient philosophies. Even Plato and Philo Judaeus have been accused by many a commentator of absurd inconsistencies, whereas the design which underlies the maze of metaphysical contradictions, so perplexing to the reader of the Timaeus, is but too evident. But has Plato ever been read understandingly by one of the expounders of the classics? This is a question warranted by the criticisms to be found in such authors as Stahlbaum, Schleiermacher, Ficinus, Heindorf, Sindham, Buttman, Taylor, and Burgess, to say nothing of lesser authorities. The covert allusions of the Greek philosopher to esoteric things have manifestly baffled these commentators to the last degree. They not only with unblushing coolness suggest as to certain difficult passages that another phraseology was evidently intended, but they audaciously make the changes. The Orphic line of the song, the order of the sixth race close, which can only be interpreted as a reference to the sixth race evolved in the consecutive evolution of the spheres. In another place, we explain with some minuteness the Hermetic philosophy of the evolution of the spheres and their several races. Burgess says, was evidently taken from a cosmogony where man was feigned to be created the last. Ought not one who undertakes to edit another's work at least understand what his author means? Indeed, the ancient philosophers seem to be generally held, even by the least prejudiced of our modern critics, to have lacked the profundity and thorough knowledge in the exact sciences of which our century is so boastful. It is even questioned whether they understood the basic scientific principle ex nihilo nihil fit. If they suspected the indestructibility of matter at all, say these commentators, it was not in consequence of a firmly established formula, but only through an intuitional reasoning and by analogy. We hold to the contrary opinion. The speculations of these philosophers upon matter were open to public criticism, but their teachings in regard to spiritual things were profoundly esoteric, being thus sworn to secrecy and religious silence upon abstruse subjects involving the relations of spirit and matter. They rivaled each other in their ingenious methods for concealing their real opinions. The doctrine of metempsychosis has been abundantly ridiculed by men of science and rejected by theologians. Yet if it had been properly understood in its application to the indestructibility of matter and the immortality of spirit, it would have been perceived that it is a sublime conception. Should we not first regard the subject from the standpoint of the ancients before venturing to disparage its teachers? The solution of the great problem of eternity belongs neither to religious superstition nor to gross materialism. The harmony and mathematical equiformity of the double evolution, spiritual and physical, are elucidated only in the universal numerals of Pythagoras, who built his system entirely upon the so-called metrical speech of the Hindu Vedas. It is but lately that one of the most zealous Sanskrit scholars, Martin Hogg, undertook the translation of the Aitareya Brahmana of the Rig Veda. It had been till that time entirely unknown. These explanations These explanations indicate beyond dispute the identity of the Pythagorean and Brahmanical systems. In both, the esoteric significance is derived from the number in the former, and the mystic relation of every number to everything intelligible to the human mind. In the latter, from the number of syllables of which each verse in the mantras consists. Plato, the ardent disciple of Pythagoras, realized it so fully as to maintain that the dodecahedron was the geometrical figure employed by the demiurgos in constructing the universe. Some of these figures had a peculiarly solemn significance. For instance, 4, of which the dodecahedron is the trine, was held sacred by the Pythagoreans. It is the perfect square, and neither of the bounding lines exceeds the order in length by a single point. It is the emblem of moral justice and divine equity. Geometrically expressed, all the powers and great symphonies of physical and spiritual nature lie inscribed within the perfect square, and the infallible name of Him, which name otherwise would remain unutterable, was replaced by this sacred number 4, the most binding and solemn oath with the ancient mystics, the Tetractys. If the Pythagorean metempsychosis should be thoroughly explained and compared with the modern theory of evolution, it would be found to supply every missing link in the chain of the ladder. But who of our scientists would consent to lose his precious time over the vagaries of the ancients? Notwithstanding proofs to the contrary, they not only deny that the nations of the archaic periods, but even the ancient philosophers, had any positive knowledge of the heliocentric system. The venerable Bediz the Augustines, and the Lecanti appear to have smothered with their dogmatic ignorance all faith in the more ancient theologists of the pre-Christian centuries. But now philology and a closer acquaintance with Sanskrit literature have partially enabled us to vindicate them from these unmerited imputations. In the Vedas, for instance, we find positive proof that so long ago as 2000 BC, the Hindu sages and scholars must have been acquainted with the rotundity of our globe and the heliocentric system. Hence, Pythagoras and Plato knew well this astronomical truth, for Pythagoras obtained his knowledge in India or from men who had been there. And Plato faithfully echoed his teachings. We will quote two passages from the Aitareya Brahmana. In the serpent mantra, from the Sanskrit text of the Rig Veda, it says that. Okay. The Brahmana declares as follows, that this mantra is that one which was seen by the queen of the serpents, Sarpa Rajni, because the earth, Iyam, is the queen of the serpents, as she is the mother and queen of all that moves, Sarpat. In the beginning, she, the earth, was but one head, round, without hair, bald, without vegetation. She then perceived this mantra which confers upon him who knows it the power of assuming any form which he might desire. She pronounced the mantra, sacrificed to the gods, and in consequence immediately obtained a motley appearance. She became variegated and able to produce any form she might like, changing one form into another. This mantra begins with the words Ayam Ga Prisnir Akramit. The description of the earth, Ayam Ga Prisnir Akramit. Ayam Ga Prisnir Akramit. Ayam Ga Prisnir Akramit. The description of the earth in the shape of a round and bald head, which was soft at first and became hard only from being breathed upon by the god Vayu, the lord of the air, forcibly suggests the idea that the authors of the sacred Vedic books knew the earth to be round or spherical. Moreover, that it had been a gelatinous mass at first, which gradually cooled off under the influence of the air and time. So much for their knowledge about our globe's sphericity. And now we will present the testimony upon which we base our assertion that the Hindus were perfectly acquainted with the heliocentric system at least 2,000 years before Christ. In the same treatise, the Hotar priest is taught how the Shastras should be repeated, and how the phenomena of sunrise and sunset are to be explained. It says the Agnishtoma is that one, that God, who burns. The sun never sets nor rises. When people think the sun is setting, it is not so. They are mistaken. For after having arrived at the end of the day, it produces two opposite effects, making night to what is below and day to what is on the other side. When they, the people, believe it rises in the morning, the sun only does thus. Having reached the end of the night, it makes itself produce two opposite effects, making day to what is below and night to what is on the other side. In fact, the sun never sets, nor does it set for him who has such a knowledge. This sentence is so conclusive that even the translator of the Rig Veda, Dr. Hogg, was forced to remark it. He says this passage contains the denial of the existence of sunrise and sunset, and that the author supposes the sun to always remain in its high position. In one of the earliest Nivids, Rishi Kutsa, a Hindu sage of the remotest antiquity, explains the allegory of the first laws given to the celestial bodies. For doing what she ought not to do, Anaitis, or Nana, the Persian Venus, representing the earth in the legend, is sentenced to turn round the sun, the Satras, or sacrificial sessions. Okay, period, and then here goes. Ait Brahm, Book 4. Prove, undoubtedly, that so early as in the 18th or 20th century BC, the Hindus had made considerable progress in astronomical science. The Satras lasted 1 year, and were nothing but an imitation of the sun's yearly course. They were divided, says Hogg, into two distinct parts, each consisting of 6 months of 30 days each. In the midst of both was the Vishuvan, equator or central day, Vishuvan, cutting the whole Satras into two halves, etc. This scholar, although he ascribes the composition of the bulk of the Brahmanas to the period 14 to 1200 BC, is of opinion that the oldest of the hymns may be placed at the very commencement of Vedic literature, between the years 24 and 2000. BC. He finds no reason for considering the Vedas as less ancient than the sacred books of the Chinese, as the Shu King, or Book of History, and the sacrificial songs of the Shi King. Philologists may yet be compelled before long to acknowledge that in astronomical knowledge, the antediluvian Hindus were their masters. At all events, there are facts which prove that certain astronomical calculations were as correct with the Chaldeans in the days of Julius Caesar as they are now, when the calendar was reformed by the conqueror. The civil year was found to correspond so little with the seasons that summer had merged into the autumn months, and the autumn months into full winter. It was Sosigenes, the Chaldean astronomer, who restored order into the confusion by putting back the 25th of March 90 days, thus making it correspond with the vernal equinox. And it was Sosigenes again who fixed the length of the months as they now remain. America, it was found by the Montezuman army that the calendar of the Aztecs gave an equal number of days and weeks to each month. The extreme accuracy of their astronomical calculations was so great that no error has been discovered in their reckoning by subsequent verifications. While the Europeans who landed in Mexico in 1519 were, by the Julian calendar, nearly 11 days in advance of the exact time. It is to the priceless and accurate translations of the Vedic books and to the personal researches of Dr. Hogg that we are indebted for the corroboration of the claims of the Hermetic philosophers that the period of Zarathustra, Spitama, Zoroaster, was of untold antiquity can be easily proved. The Brahmanas, to which Hogg ascribes 4,000 years, describe the religious contest between the ancient Hindus who lived in the pre-Vedic period and the Iranians. The battles between the Devas and the Asuras, the former representing the Hindu and the latter the Iranians, are described at length in the sacred books, as the Iranian prophet was the first to raise himself against what he called the idolatry of the Brahmins, and to designate them as the Devas, devils. How far back must then have been this religious crisis? This contest, answers Dr. Hogg, must have appeared to the authors of the Brahmanas as old as the facts of King Arthur appeared to English writers of the 19th century. There was not a philosopher of any notoriety who did not hold to this doctrine of metempsychosis as taught by the Brahmins, Buddhists, and later by the Pythagoreans. In its esoteric sense, whether he expressed it more or less intelligibly, Origen and Clemens Alexandrinus, Synesius and Chalcidius all believed in it, and the Gnostics, who are unhesitatingly proclaimed by history as a body of the most refined, learned, and enlightened men. Were all believers in metempsychosis. Socrates entertained opinions identical with those of Pythagoras, and both, as the penalty of their divine philosophy, were put to a violent death. The rabble has been the same in all ages. Materialism has been and will ever be blind to spiritual truths. These philosophers held with the Hindus that God had infused into matter a portion of his own divine spirit, which animates and moves every particle. They taught that men have two souls, of separate and quite different natures. The one perishable, the astral soul, or the inner, fluidic body. The other incorruptible and immortal, the Agoiades, or a portion of the divine spirit. That the immortal or astral soul perishes at each gradual change at the threshold of every new sphere, becoming with every transmigration more purified. The astral man, intangible and invisible as he might be to our mortal, earthly senses, is still constituted of matter, though sublimated. Aristotle, notwithstanding that for political reasons of his own, he maintained a prudent silence as to certain esoteric matters, expressed very clearly his opinion on the subject. It was his belief that human souls are emanations of God, but are finally reabsorbed into divinity. Zeno, the founder of the Stoics, taught that there are two eternal qualities throughout nature, the one active or male, the other passive or female. That the former is pure, subtle ether or divine spirit, the other entirely inert in itself till united with the active principle. That the divine spirit acting upon matter produced fire. water, earth, and air, and that it is the sole efficient principle by which all nature is moved. The Stoics, like the Hindu sages, believed in the final absorption. Saint Justin believed in the emanation of these souls from divinity, and Tatian, the Assyrian, his disciple, declared that man was an immortal as God himself. Man was as immortal as God himself. Anacalypsis. That profoundly insignificant verse of the Genesis, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, I gave a living soul, should arrest the attention of every Hebrew scholar capable of reading the scripture in its original, instead of following the erroneous translation in which the phrase reads, wherein there is life. From the first to the last chapters, the translators of the, of the Jewish sacred books misconstrued this meaning. They have even changed the spelling of the name of God, as Sir W. Drummond proves. Thus, L, if written correctly, would read al, for it stands in the original, al, and according to Higgins, this word means the god Mithra, the Son, the preserver and savior. Sir W. Drummond shows that Bethel means the house of the sun in its literal translation, and not of God. El, in the composition of these Canaanite names, does not signify Deus, but soul. Thus, theology has disfigured ancient theosophy, and science ancient philosophy. The absolute necessity for the perpetration of such pious frauds by the early fathers and later theologians becomes apparent, if we consider that if they had allowed the word al to remain as in the original, it would have become but too evident. Except for the initiated, that the Jehovah of Moses and the Son were identical. The multitudes which ignore that the ancient Hierophant considered our visible sun but as an emblem of the central, invisible, and spiritual sun, would have accused Moses, as many of our modern commentators have already done, of worshipping the planetary bodies, in short, of actual Zabaism. For lack of comprehension of this great philosophical principle, the methods of modern science, however exact, must end in nullity. In no one branch can it demonstrate the origin and ultimate of things. Instead of tracing the effect from its primal source, its progress is the reverse. Hold on. Its higher types, as it teaches, are all evolved from antecedent lower ones. It starts from the bottom of the cycle, led on step by step in the great labyrinth of nature by a thread of matter. As soon as this breaks and the clue is lost, it recoils in affright from the incomprehensible and confesses itself powerless. Not so did Plato and his disciples. With him the lower types were but the concrete images of the higher abstract ones. The soul, which is immortal, has an arithmetical, as the body has a geometrical. beginning. This beginning, as the reflection of the great universal archaeus, is self-moving, and from the center diffuses itself over the whole body of the microcosm. It was the sad perception, of this truth that made Tyndall confess how powerless is science even over the world of matter. The first marshalling of the atoms, on which all subsequent action depends, baffles a keener power than that of the microscope. Through pure excess of complexity, and long before observation can have any voice in the matter, the most highly trained intellect, the most refined and disciplined imagination, retires in bewilderment from the contemplation of the problem. We are struck dumb by an astonishment which no microscope can relieve, doubting not only the power of our instrument, but even whether we ourselves possess the intellectual elements which will ever enable us to grapple with the ultimate structural energies of nature. The fundamental geometrical figure of the Kabbalah, that figure which tradition and the esoteric doctrines tell us was given by the deity itself to Moses on Mount Sinai. Exodus. Contains in its grandiose, because simple combination, the key to the universal problem. This figure contains in itself all the others. For those who are able to master it, there is no need to exercise imagination. No earthly microscope can be compared with the keenness of the spiritual perception. And even for those who are unacquainted with the great science, the description given by a well-trained child psychometer of the genesis of a grain, a fragment of crystal, or any other object is worth all the telescopes and microscopes of exact science. There may be more truth in the adventurous pangenesis of Darwin, whom Tyndall calls a soaring speculator, than in the cautious, line-bound hypothesis of the latter, who, in common with other thinkers of his class, surrounds his imagination by the firm frontiers of reason. The theory of a microscopic germ, which contains in itself a world of minor germs, soars in one sense, at least, into the infinite. It oversteps the world of matter and begins unconsciously busying itself in the world of spirit. If we accept Darwin's theory of the development of species, we find that his starting point is placed in front of an open door. We are at liberty with him to either remain within or cross the threshold beyond, which lies the limitless and incomprehensible, or rather the unutterable. If our mortal language is inadequate to express what our spirit dimly foresees in the great beyond, while on this earth, it must realize it at some point in the timeless eternity. Not so with Professor Huxley's theory of the physical basis of life. Regardless of the formidable majority of nays from his German brother scientists, he creates a universal protoplasm and appoints its cells to become henceforth the sacred founts on the principle of all life, by making the latter identical in living man, dead Muten, a nettle sting, and a lobster, by shutting in the molecular cell of the protoplasm, the life principle, and by shutting out from it the divine influx, which comes with subsequent evolution, he closes every door against any possible escape. Like an able tactician, he converts his laws and facts into sentries whom he causes to mount guard over every issue. The standard under which he rallies them is inscribed with the word necessity, but hardly is it unfurled when he mocks the legend and calls it an empty shadow of my own imagination. The fundamental doctrines of spiritualism, he says, lie outside the limits of philosophical inquiry. We will be bold enough to contradict this assertion and say that they lie a great deal more within such inquiry than Mr. Huxley's protoplasm, insomuch that they present evident and palpable facts of the existence of spirit and the protoplasmic cells, once dead, present none whatever of being the originators of the basis of life, as this one of the few foremost thinkers of the day wants us to believe. The ancient Kabbalists rested upon no hypothesis till he could lay its basis upon the firm rock of recorded experiment. But the too great dependence upon physical facts led to a growth of materialism and decadence of spirituality and faith. At the time of Aristotle, this was the prevailing tendency of thought, and though the Delphic commandment was not as yet completely eliminated from Grecian thought, and some philosophers still held that in order to know what man is, we ought to know what man was, still materialism had already begun to gnaw at the root of faith. The mysteries themselves had degenerated in a very great degree into mere priestly speculations and religious fraud. Few were the true adepts and initiates, the heirs and descendants of those who had been dispersed by the conquering swords of various invaders of old Egypt. The time predicted by the great Hermes in his dialogue with Asclepius had indeed come, the time when impious foreigners would accuse Egypt of adoring monsters, and not but the letters engraved in stone upon her monuments would survive, enigmas incredible to posterity. Their sacred scribes and hierophants were wanderers upon the face of the earth, obliged from fear of a profanation of the sacred mysteries to seek refuge among the Hermetic fraternities, known later as the Essenes. Their esoteric knowledge was buried deeper than ever. The triumphant brand of Aristotle's people swept away from his path of conquest every vestige of a once pure religion, and Aristotle himself, the type and child of his epoch, though instructed in the secret science of the Egyptians, knew but little of this crowning result of millenniums of esoteric studies, as well as those who lived in the days of the Sametics, our present-day philosophers. Lift the veil of Isis, for Isis is but the symbol of nature, but they see only her physical forms. The soul within escapes their view, and the Divine Mother has no answer for them. There are anatomists who, uncovering to sight no indwelling spirit under the layers of muscles, the network of nerves, or the cinereteous matter, which they lift with the point of the scalpel, assert that man has no soul. Such are as purblind in sophistry as the student, who, confining his research to the cold letter of the Kabbalah, dares say it has no vivifying spirit. To see the true man, who once inhabited the subject, which lies before him, on the dissecting table, the surgeon must use other eyes than those of his body. So the glorious truth covered up in the hieratic writings of the ancient papyri can be revealed only to him who possesses the faculty of intuition, which, if we call reason the eye of the mind, may be defined as the eye of the soul.